Hey everyone, Lord Bite Me Man here again. I had a decent response to the last random horror vlog, and because my upload schedule has been about as regular as an anal retentive senior citizen on strike from his prunes, I figured I'd try a second one because these are a little bit easier for me to do. So this installment, I'm going to be talking about a fun little experience I had back in 1995 that I like to call the time I got sketched out by a non-horror film. Yeah, the bad art kind of works for me. So, as I was saying, the year was 1995. I was 16 at the time and engaged in one of my favorite pastimes of all, vigorous outdoor cardiovascular activities. Obviously kidding here, I was playing video games and watching TV like any other 16-year-old. Uh, it was not what I would call the most socially active period in my life. Anyway, I turned off the power on my SNES. Yes, I am dating this totally faithfully to the period here. I turned off my SNES, flipped the TV back to the cable feed, and I was staring at something that looked like a news report. The resolution and the light filtering, it was totally consistent with what you'd see from a live news broadcast back then, and not what you'd see with like a movie or anything. Those have different sort of color filtration. I figured that, I must have left it on the news when I flipped on the game, so just flip through the cable guide here and see what else is on. Alright, now, some of the more astute young viewers out there might be saying, cable guide? Let me just set the scene a little bit for all you folks who I like to call you little bastards with your lives still ahead of you. The 1990s were a very different time from today. We didn't have a button you could push on the television to see not only what channel you were on, but what was playing at the time and what would be playing for the next 24 hours. There was no on-demand. Figuring out what you wanted to watch on TV or what was actually on and what you were watching involved one of two things. You either had to flip to this channel where the lineup would scroll through and it would take like 5 minutes, even though there were only 100 channels back then, and now you have 500 channels. Or you could look it up in this magazine we got every week called The Cable Guide. The takeaway here is there was no easy way to tell what exactly you were watching at that moment. It involved some effort. And that's only part of the confusion you're about to undergo here, because the mid-90s were an interesting time. Cable was really exploding around this time, and it, not just this wasn't just when people were signing up for it. You had a big explosion of channels during this time. Mid-90s, that was when you got Comedy Central. People started watching that. You got, History, TLC. All these channels were just blowing up all over the place in the mid-90s. And that included a lot of new cable news networks. We were really only, at this point in 1995, 4 years removed from watching CNN broadcast the Gulf War live on TV. And, even seeing TV programs preempted for cable news coverage of the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. So the notion that there was a cable news network out there that you'd never even heard of bumping scheduled TV off the air to cover a sudden catastrophic event in the middle of a war zone in some far-off corner of the world was a very new but very possible thing for us. We weren't quite wrapping our heads around it, but we were starting to be familiar with the concept. Keep this in mind as we go forward. Now, there's one more thing that I have to talk about at the time, too, and that helps understand why this was a bit of a freak-out for me. We were also only a few years removed from the collapse of the Soviet Union. And while Vladimir Putin looks like a Bond villain and making Russia look like the technological and military colossus of the earth right now, or at the very least just, a country that has its shit together, this was a time when Russia absolutely did not have its shit together. The economy was in a shambles. Boris Yeltsin's government appeared to be floundering. Everybody was worried about a backslide into communism. You had the rise of an ultra-nationalist in Russia named Vladimir Zhirinovsky, and there were big fears of rogue elements of the military that they might hijack old Soviet equipment and nuclear weapons and start a war. So I was reading through the cable guide, and I started to catch bits and pieces of this thing that I thought was a newscast. I was hearing things like the Persian Gulf, which is a place the US military was at the time and is today, and We never seem to leave. I was also hearing phrases like Soviet subs, which is exactly what you would have referred to a Russian sub as in 1995, because that was the era it was produced in, and that was basically what all the Russian military equipment was in the 1990s, was just holdover Soviet equipment. I also started hearing the word nuclear a lot. This caused me to instantly tense up, because one of my more lesser widely held phobias in society is a phobia of nuclear attacks, specifically being in the middle of one. Boy, I'm glad I don't have to worry about that these days, eh? Yeah. So, suffice it to say, my attention was very much dialed in. I saw some network call letters in the corner that I didn't recognize. It said CBN. I had no clue what they stood for, but as I said, it was not unusual in the slightest to see a cable news network you didn't know existed breaking off programming to cover very serious events. The next thing I saw caused me to absolutely lose my shit about this whole thing. It was a face that damn near instantly had me shitting myself in a panic. Newt Gingrich. Other than the obvious, I mean, look at the guy. There was a very important reason to be scared shitless about seeing Newt Gingrich on a report about a Persian Gulf conflict involving Soviet equipment in 1995. Newt Gingrich in 1995 was Speaker of the House of Representatives. They wouldn't have the Speaker of the House on unless shit was absolutely hitting the fan. I was seeing the Speaker of the House on a news report about a conflict with nuclear-armed vessels in the Persian Gulf. My eyes were as wide as fucking dinner plates. Suffice it to say, the world didn't end in nuclear hellfire that night. Can't say anything about future nights, but not that night. After a few minutes, the report cut away to a dialogue scene between the anchor and one of the assistant producers in a parking garage. That was the point when my naive 16-year-old mind was finally set at ease. This thing was definitely a movie. So after trembling and borderline pants shitting was done, I got the good sense to look up the name of the film in the cable guide. It was a 1984 film called Countdown to Looking Glass. The Soviet stuff the film was referring to was the actual Soviet Union. The Persian Gulf scenario was just referring to a hypothetical with the Gulf state of Oman. And Newt Gingrich? Just a coincidence. They wanted a congressman willing to play a part in the movie, and Newty signed up. Then again, should I be saying it's not a horror film? I mean, look at that mug. I ended up watching the rest of the film, which involved some intense scenes like the Nimitz getting nuked. And in the end, I learned a valuable lesson. Change the channel and see if any place else is covering it. But that is the tale of the time I totally got sketched out by a non-horror film. So there you have it. If you like this, go ahead and let me know down in the comments, or shoot me some feedback on Twitter. And until next time, may God have mercy on my soul.